between ourselves and the places we are supporting with our business, that we will do what is required to sanitize and be safe in what we bring into the store, and they should be doing the same. So it's inexcusable that, firstly, that counter is operating, but they don't have the proper sanitation measures in place. And secondly, that you were brushed off by the store manager like that. Maureen, my suggestion, seeing as you're getting nowhere with the store directly, is to call the provincial coronavirus hotline and ask for their guidance. It's 928 4102. 928 4102. Ask them what they would recommend you do to raise this issue of a store that is not following proper procedure in terms of hygiene and not taking your input on how to take it further very seriously. That would be my suggestion. You have made the effort to do it via the store. It hasn't worked. I would now take it a step further. And good luck. Let us know if you have any joy. Maureen in Fishhook. That's brought the time to 2 o'clock. A reminder that after the news, we're going to be talking to Deon Meyer for the entire hour, talking about his new book called The Last Hunt, and talking about turning books into TV series and movies, living in lockdown, writing in lockdown, and much more.
On CapeTalk.co.za.
On the app.
On DSTV channel 885.
And across the city on 567 AM.
Join the conversation. You're with Cape Talk.
You're with Cape Talk.
This is Eyewitness News.
Good afternoon, I'm Wesley Peterson. Eskom says there's an 80% chance South Africans will experience only 3 days of load shedding this winter. Earlier this year, they were predicting more than 30 days of blackout. The power utility has briefed the media on the state of the national grid. Teto Mahlakwana reports.
The COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent national lockdown appear to have provided Eskom with a bittersweet outcome. While some of its operations
Deon, nice
had
to chat
be
to you
halted
again.
due to
Hi,
the crisis,
Pippa, nice to talk to you too. Nice to see you.
also got an opportunity to deal with its short-term maintenance. This could only have been implemented due to the reduced
I'm not
energy
hearing you
demand
yet.
during lockdown,
Just a sec.
and some of
Sorry.
Eskom's major electricity consumers shut their doors. Eskom also says this will enable its generation fleet to be better prepared when the demand peaks, when the lockdown restrictions are lifted. The company has, however, admitted that it is still lagging behind with its reliability maintenance, which has been neglected for the past 10 years, leading to
Yes, we can hear you, dear.
Eskom's Chief Operating Officer, Jan Oberholzer.
The system remains unpredictable and very unreliable. So we still have trips and breakdowns. So although we forecast at this point in time the possibility of 3 days of load shedding, I need to say that the risk of load shedding remains.
The power utility has also recorded 21 positive cases of COVID-19 among its employees, mainly in the Western Cape. Teto Mahlakwana, Eyewitness News, Johannesburg.
Parliament could be temporarily moved to Gauteng during the lockdown, but only if necessary and as a last option. National Assembly will sit under lockdown for the first time on Wednesday, with some MPs in the House and others connected online. The EFF had asked for the session to take place in Gauteng due to the Western Cape's high COVID-19 infection rate and difficulties in travelling. Gay Davis reports.
Speaker Thandi Modise says she's yet to receive the EFF's written proposal on temporarily relocating Parliament to Gauteng. But she says she can do this in terms of the powers, privileges and immunities of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act.
The powers and privileges do give us the authority to designate any place, any venue as precinct. And yes, if we consider it important, if we consider it as a last option, we will do so.
Modise says MPs in Cape Town will be able to attend Wednesday's first question and answer session under lockdown, while the others will connect using the Zoom platform, which caters for large numbers.
We may get 40, we may get 50, we may even get 200 members there. But as the presiding officer, I am not going to force anybody who says to me, I am at the risky category, I am not prepared to risk my life there, because I am not going to force members into the House and be liable.
Gay Davis, Eyewitness News.
The City of Cape Town has defended proposed amendments to its streets, public places and prevention of noise nuisances bylaw. The move has been widely criticized, but the city believes it will ensure its laws are on par with the Criminal Procedure Act. The time for public comment has now ended and the city is collating responses. Jerita Casson has more.
Land and housing advocacy group Ndifuna Ukwazi argues the amendments will give authorized individuals additional powers to impound items without a warrant. According to the Criminal Procedure Act, a warrant is needed when seizing items, and there are only a few exceptions to that rule. Attorney at the Women's Legal Clinic, Chrissy Blouse, also states the Act and the Public Spaces bylaw serve different purposes, and there is no need to achieve greater parity between the two.
This bylaw and the amendments will specifically allow for the targeting of poor people of color and be able to remove them from specific white affluent areas.
Like Ndifuna Ukwazi, the clinic has also made a formal submission against the proposal, and both groups feel the amendments will unfairly target the homeless. In its current form, the bylaw prohibits certain actions in public spaces, including bathing, erecting a shelter, urinating, and sleeping overnight. Charita Kassan, Eyewitness News.
The Oudtshoorn fire station has been disinfected after a member came into contact with a person infected with the coronavirus. The firefighter, now under self-quarantine, recently attended to a road crash, after which the patient was informed he had contracted COVID-19. The municipality's spokesperson, Ntobeko Mankwenkwe, says services are continuing.
As a precautionary measure, management has asked the personnel that were in direct contact to stay at home and return on Monday. Meanwhile, all the procedures to ensure that the fire station personnel and the station itself remain uninfected were taken.
And millions of people in India and Bangladesh are having to endure a double catastrophe. Apart from the COVID-19 pandemic, a powerful cyclone has slammed into eastern India and is battling towards Bangladesh. Cyclone Amphan is the strongest storm ever recorded in the Bay of Bengal. CNN's Viduka Sood.
Homes along the coastal area of West Bengal have faced the brunt of those high waves as well. At this time, they're not only dealing with the destruction, which has to be assessed over the days, they're also dealing with the whole problem of social distancing.
Gold's trading at $1,737, 1 cent an ounce. The rand's 17.89 to the dollar, 21.89 to the pound, 19.67 to the euro. Brent crude's $35.23 a barrel. There's a fault fire causing poor visibility on the N2 between Reunion Drive and Hazeldean Road. You need to proceed with caution. Traffic lights are defective in Paro at Delaray and Radnor, as well as Delaray and Industrial Ring Road, and in Edgemead at Plattekloof Road and the N7. Cape Town weather today, a 60% chance of light rain with a fresh north-northwester and a high of 21. Top story this hour, Eskom says there's an 80% chance South Africans will experience only 3 days of load shedding this winter.
Eyewitness News, in touch, in tune, and independent. For the latest, visit ewn.mobi.
This is Cape Talk.
Join the conversation with Pippa Hudson on lunch.
It's 8 minutes past 2, and if you're just tuning in for the first time this afternoon, where have you been? But better late than never. Welcome to the show. You have missed a conversation about the predicament of foreign nationals living in South Africa who are battling to access food aid. We chatted to SASSA, we chatted to the Provincial Social Development Department. We also had a conversation with one of the community members who stuck up her hand and said, well, if nobody else is helping, I will, and is now feeding upwards of 9,000 people every single day. Please go and look for that podcast if you missed the interviews, available on the Cape Talk website and via the app. You'll also be able to listen back to our Minute of Mindfulness for the day. Apologies, a technical error took down our Skype machine, so we weren't able to bring you the conversation about deforestation in the Amazon. We'll do our best to reschedule that for early next week if possible. In the second hour of the show, it's all about one thing and one thing only, and that is delving into the mind of award-winning, best-selling crime writer Deon Meyer, who is standing by to join us on a webinar with Exclusive Books to talk about his new novel, The Last Hunt. We're going to take a short ad break. We'll be joined by our Zoom guests thereafter, and we're going to be chatting for the remainder of this hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can send an SMS or WhatsApp or call in with your question. Don't go anywhere.
Lunch with Pippa Hudson.
We all have a voice. Use yours. Call 021 446 0567.
Join the conversation.
On Cape Talk.
CapeTalk and the Dis-Chem Foundation are showing random acts of kindness to organizations involved in their communities. Together, we can make a difference.
Let's talk to Aleph Muhlenberg, who is the Deputy CEO of Africa Tikkun.
We have transformed ourselves to really be a social support services organization.
We have been working with Africa Tikkun, and when the call came down for the lockdown, we noticed how many people were starving in South Africa, and this doesn't sit very well with us. We've actually noticed how bad the situation is throughout the country, and Aleph has actually decided to assist you for the next 3 months with 150,000 Rand.
Wow, we are more than grateful. We really do appreciate the help and the partnership with the Dis-Chem Foundation.
Tell us about an organization or community that deserves a break. Go to capetalk.co.za to nominate them for a random act of kindness distributed by Dis-Chem, Pharmacists Who Care. Visit capetalk.co.za for more inspiring stories.
The Small Business Shout Out on Breakfast with Refiwe Maloto is brought to you by 91. Since they opened their doors as Investec Asset Management almost 30 years ago, 91 has been helping their clients deal with change. Their approach is to tackle it head on, and that is what they're doing now. They are committed to playing their part in rebuilding our well-being and our economy, whether by seeking the best possible investment outcomes for their clients or by joining efforts to combat the impact of COVID-19. 91, investing for a world of change. 91 is an authorized FSP. T's and C's apply.
Are you looking to deep clean your home or office space? Click Cleaning are essential service providers and continue to operate during lockdown. We offer a wide range of deep cleaning services, including enzyme cleaning, sanitizing, and fogging. We also offer deep cleaning of carpets, rugs, upholstery, and more. Click Cleaning are a proudly South African brand using non-toxic products, and our work is guaranteed. For a free quote, simply visit clickcleaning.co.za.
In the news this hour, the pandemic is now affecting many families. With no money for food or the chance to find work, the situation for more and more Cape Townians will get even better, with sandwiches and soup being distributed through ladles of love.
Together we can rewrite the COVID-19 story. Let's change our memories of 2020 with stories of Cape Town's compassion and love. Help us serve 1 million meals by simply donating 150 Rand a month at ctloved.co.za.
Coming up at 3.
It's the afternoon drive with John Matham.
Only on Cape Talk.
Join the conversation. Cape Talk. WhatsApp Pippa Hudson.
072 567 1567.
Well, it is my great pleasure right now to welcome two audiences to the show. Both our listeners tuned in on 567 medium wave and listening via the Cape Talk app or website, and our webinar audience who've joined us on Zoom for this second collaboration with Exclusive Books. So a reminder to those listening on air, if you'd like to join the conversation, you have several options at your disposal. You can call us on 021 446 0567. Send an SMS to 31567 or leave a voice note on 072 567 1567. To those on the webinar, hello and welcome. Lovely to have you with us. Please use the chat box to post your questions for Deon. And many thanks to the very enthusiastic fans who've been mailing us questions ever since they heard this was happening. Deon, I hope you've got yourself ready for a whole wide-ranging conversation because the questions are on all kinds of topics, from COVID-19 to who would be your ultimate dinner guest with Benny Chrysal and more. It's lovely to have you on the show again. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Pippa, for having me. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be here, and thank you to everybody who's joined us on all those platforms. I saw that you advertised this is going to be a deep dive into the mind of an author. Authors don't have deep minds, so let's just not raise the expectations too high.
Well, let me raise some expectations, as I must, by way of introduction, Deon, because for those who don't know, Deon's works have been published in more than 40 countries. They've been translated into 27 or 28 different languages at last count, I think. Of course, he's a massive bestseller here at home. His book, 13 Hours, won the Booker Prize, was shortlisted for the Crime Writers Association International Dagger. His work has won awards in France, in Germany, in Sweden as well. Producers have snapped up the film rights to, I think it was 7 of the novels at last count. And of course, many of us really enjoyed the recent TV production of Trackers, which aired on Mnet not so long ago. Deon's latest work is Prooi, which is now available in English as The Last Hunt. And it is a novel that manages to combine the thrill of the police procedure and a murder investigation with the politics of state capture. And those two side-by-side plot lines eventually come together for a very unexpected and explosive finish. The book's published by Hodder and Stoughton. It's distributed here in South Africa by Jonathan Ball Publishers, and it's available at all exclusive bookstores and on their website. If you happen to live within 5 kilometers of certain exclusive books branches, you also have the option of ordering it on Uber Eats. In case you've missed it, exclusive books have teamed up with Uber Eats on the app, and if you tap into the convenience section, if you find exclusive books listed there, it means you can order from a selection of books which can be dropped at your front door within the hour. And this book, The Last Hunt, is on that list. So lots of options available for you. And I hope Uber Eats have got a fleet of drivers standing by for the surge in orders that's about to come in after this chat, Deon. Where are we talking to you from? Are you in lockdown in Loxton, or where are you in the country?
No, I'm in Stellenbosch. We've been living in Stellenbosch for some years now, so I'm sitting in my writing room. And I've been writing most of the morning, so this is a very natural habitat for me.
Okay. I mean, it must be quite surreal for a writer. You're used to having to spend hours on your own, cooped up at your computer in your office, as so many of us are doing working from home these days. How easy or difficult has that made lockdown for you?
It's made it extremely easy. My wife, Marianne, and I, we both work from home. She's a painter, so we have our little working sections in the house. And for us, not that much changed. I mean, during level 5, we couldn't go out riding our mountain bikes, which was the only real big difference to our normal existence. For me, lockdown has been a little bit of a blessing, and I'm embarrassed to say, because it gave me time to really knuckle down on the new novel that is now sort of approaching the last 20,000 pages. And if it wasn't for that, I would have been under tremendous pressure, because my schedule was quite hectic. So I must admit that I'm perhaps one of the few people very grateful for the seclusion of the lockdown.
Okay. I assume you mean the last 20,000 words, Deon. If it's 20,000 more pages, you're going to have to ask them to increase lockdown for another 5 months to let us all read it at the end.
20,000 words indeed.
Are you quite meticulous in your approach to writing? I know Stephen King, for example, says you need to set yourself a goal in a window every morning where you write at the same time every single day. Are you like that, or are there days where you feel inspired and days where you don't?
No, I'm very much like that. You know, it's a very interesting thing. I've never written for such a prolonged period of time every day. Usually you write for 2 weeks, then you do a couple of book events, or I have to go overseas or something like that. And that has been to me a little bit of a problem, because for the first time, I never get that opportunity to just stand back from the book that you're writing and just get a little bit of a bird's eye view. So I feel very much inside the book. And last week I took off 2 days just to get that bit of distance. But I believe that routine is extremely important. Writing is very much about momentum. You have to build the momentum to get into the book, get things happening, but it's never easy. It never just happens until hopefully the last 20,000 words.
Okay. Now, Deon, a question in from Arthur Goldstuck, who's one of the panelists listening in. He says when he first met you back at Sanlam somewhere in the deep into the 90s, you had already started producing your novels, but you still had a day job. He's wondering, did you at that point already have a future as a full-time author mapped out, or did it take some kind of pivotal moment to make that leap to full-time writer?
It's great to hear from Arthur. He's an old friend. I also follow him on Twitter. He's one of our best technology minds in South Africa. Arthur, nice to hear from you. Back then, I had no inkling of the possibility of being a full-time author. You know, you write a book, you hope that it will do well. And my whole career was one of just surprises. I don't know who was more surprised, me or my mother, but things just kept on happening. I got an agent who started selling me internationally. And I think the pivotal moment for me was only when I realized that I could afford financially to only live off my books. And even then, it took me 4 or 5 years to really make that jump.
Okay, there's hope there for the struggling writers listening to the conversation, I think. Deon, let's talk about the new book, The Last Hunt, or Prooi as it was in Afrikaans. You've, in previous interviews that I've watched and listened to, you've described this as a book that was born out of anger, your anger at what was going on in South Africa during the Jacob Zuma years and the state capture time. You first started writing this book and working on it while those years were underway and the former president was still in power, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I have to tell the full story, I think, to allow people to make sense of it. Throughout my career, especially internationally, I have tried to be a very positive ambassador about South Africa. I try to promote our tourism because I think that's the biggest job generator in this country. And often under difficult circumstances. I remember doing interviews around the 2010 World Cup where foreign journalists were telling me what a big failure the World Cup would be in South Africa, and always standing up for our country and being very proud of what we had achieved since '94. And then I felt under the previous president that it was being destroyed. I think the legacy of Mandela and the legacy of everything that everybody has worked so hard on in South Africa to build was being destroyed. And that really angered me. The sad thing was that when Zuma became president, I was one of the people who in the international media said, give this man a chance. It doesn't matter what sort of background he has. His heart is in the right place. And I was proved wrong by that too. So yes, I was growing more and more angry. And I think emotion is a very good starting point for any book, because if you feel strongly about what you're doing, then hopefully that translates into the book as well.
And of course, it's a sentiment you have one of your characters in this book articulate, that sense of betrayal and of Madiba's legacy having been destroyed. We don't want to give too much of the plot away, so I'm going to tread gently around this. But I'm interested to know, I mean, it came from that sense of anger, and you personally felt quite affronted by it all in terms of what you've described there. Even given that source, did you intentionally set out to say this one is going to be a state capture novel, or did you find you set out to write a murderous mystery and the headlines and the emotion just oozed their way into the book naturally?
No, it started out being a state capture topic. I wanted to explore that. I wanted to look at solutions. How do we get out of this? And then you start speculating. Are there other people within the ruling party who feel the same? What would they do? How do we change things? And that, you know, that sort of what if game is something that I often play, and that brings story ideas.
Now, without giving too much of the plot away, I think we can safely say this is a book that has woven through it, a plot line of an assassination attempt on the president. I'm intrigued to know, I mean, was at the time you were writing, you were still in the thick of it. It was a time where things looked bleak. There was not very much hope on the horizon for anything changing. Is that, you think, what led you to that particular plot line? Was it, what is a sense of hopelessness, a sense of frustration that the channels that should have worked to fix this problem weren't working?
It was absolutely a sense of frustration. I wanted to make myself feel better in the process. You know, the funny thing was that President Ramaphosa was elected before I had finished the novel, and I was a little bit worried that was going to happen. How was that going to change the way that I was going to write the book? And if that was a different outcome during that election, The Last Hunt would definitely have had a different ending. Again, I can't say too much because I'm going to spoil it for people who haven't read the book. But that was a very pivotal moment in terms of the writing and the plotting of the novel.
Okay. I'm interested to know if you faced any pushback once the novel was published. I mean, as you make very clear in this book, the state capture regime, shall we call them, notorious for their smear campaigns, for the subtle and not so subtle threats against those who dissented. Did you face anything of the kind yourself?
Pippa, I did not, and that made me come to the conclusion that the state capture people are not big readers.
Ouch, take that. Okay, well, I'm delighted to hear it. Now, somebody who's read the novel already has sent us a question on the webinar chat, and let me just get back to this. Referring to one of the characters who emerges in this book, Daniel is the name he goes by when we first meet him. He's a character living in France, although we soon realize in exile of sorts from South Africa. And the question is, he is the character I first came across and really that hooked me into this book. The end left me wondering if he's going to feature again in the future. Do you think he might?
I have no doubt that he will. I just have to find the right story. For me, story always comes first. I decide what is the story I want to tell, and then I go looking for characters. If I have characters that fit the story perfectly, I will use them. If not, I will create new characters from scratch.
Okay, so watch the space. It might yet happen. Speaking of the recurring characters, you have, of course, the legendary Benny Crystal, and we're going to talk about him in a moment. But his sidekick, Vaughn Cupido, gets to articulate the sense of frustration of the good people within a bad system. He is enraged when his girlfriend's son refers to him as being captured because he's part of the Hawks, and he feels a great sense of shame at that suggestion. It really kind of echoes almost a national sense of shame that all of us would have been feeling at that time, doesn't it?
It does, but I also think it accurately reflects a lot of good people working for the Hawks. I have good contacts in the Hawks in Cape Town, and I spoke to them at length during this period. I did a lot of research. I also attended the retirement ceremony of one of the senior Hawks detectives, and that was their sentiment, that they are ashamed that people think that all police men and women are part of the state capture apparatus, which wasn't the case. There's a lot of good cops out there.
It's really reassuring to hear that. Another good cop in this book is Mbali Kaleni, and someone's just SMS'd us predicting that she is set to become the National Police Commissioner a few books from now. They're obviously very fond of that character, as they are of Vaughn Cupido. I'm so glad they reminded me about Mbali Kaleni, because I wanted to ask you, she's really interesting in this book in that she is the senior cop who quietly rebels, who decides, I'm not going to follow the instruction to look the other way. We will quietly work behind the scenes to try and solve this case, even if it costs us our reputations and our careers. And I read that and I thought, I wonder how Deon feels about those who are rebelling against lockdown regulations, because you have a rebel in your book who refuses to toe the line. Any thoughts on those who refuse to toe the line when the regulations don't make sense?
Well, I have a lot of empathy for people who feel rebellious when some of the stuff don't make sense. I think the exercise prescriptions of between 6 and 9 perhaps isn't the smartest move. I think the cigarette ban is definitely not a great move. But we're all in this together, and the government is doing their best, so we need to too. I'll leave it. I'm planning a lockdown novel after the one that I'm busy with now. And
Okay.
I'm sure Vaughn Cupido will have a lot to say about the lockdown measures, but for now, I'm all for it.
Okay, thank you. Now, well, you mentioned the ban on cigarettes. What about the ban on booze? Because I thought of Benny Crystal. He is on the wagon in this particular book. He is managing to conquer his struggle with alcohol, but those of us who've read the last couple have followed him through the ups and downs. I couldn't help wondering how you think he would have managed a lockdown with no booze on sale in the past.
Well, it's going to depend on how Benny's fight against the bottle is playing out. I think he would be very relieved. I think Benny would be more concerned about the ban on cigarettes, because it's a well-known fact that many alcoholics who struggle with their addiction use cigarettes as a sort of a crutch. There was an interesting article in one of the newspapers the other day about other people who take medication and who needs their cigarettes. I think that would be a bigger problem for Benny than the alcohol as such. I think he would be a little bit relieved that he can't get his hands on it.
Okay, yeah, I suppose there is that. I mean, has Benny taken on a life of his own in your head? Because I remember reading quite early on, Deon, that you never originally created him with the intent of making him a lead character. He was intended as something of a foil to other characters. But it seems to me like he's got into your head and taken up residence to some degree.
He has, and I think it's mainly because he has got into the heads of so many readers. I mean, he's the one character that everybody wants not to die and to keep coming back. And I keep getting emails, when is the next Benny book coming? You know, if you get that sort of positive feedback from readers, then you feel more inclined to write about Benny. And he does have a life of his own. I think about him even when I'm not writing, and I worry about him and think, what's he doing and how's he doing? It becomes a strange world that is not real, but is very much part of your subconscious.
Why do you think people love him so much? I mean, he's a very flawed character. As much as he's the hero of the stories, he is a deeply human being. Do you think that's why he is so beloved?
I'd like to believe that it's because he's human, that he's got his frailties, that he's a common man. You know, he's got no delusions of grandeur. He suffers. He never manages to cope financially. He battles with the relationships with his children and his ex-wife and that sort of thing. And I think people can relate to that. People can relate to the fact that he's not a superhero.
We'll carry on chatting about the non-superhero after this short break for our update from the Eyewitness News team. They're just going to fill us in on what's on the headlines at 2:30, and then our conversation with Deon Meyer continues. Loads of questions coming in from our webinar panel. Remember, CapeTalk listeners, you're also very welcome to send a text or a WhatsApp or to call us on 021 446 0567. Let's just touch base with Wesley Peterson for the latest Eyewitness News.
Thanks, Pippa. Good afternoon. Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter says while the company's restructuring process is underway, they are still working on its independent financial sustainability. The power utility has been dependent on government guarantees for years to keep up with its operations as it struggles with debt of 450 billion rand. The city of Cape Town has again been legally blocked from evicting squatters during the lockdown. The Western Cape High Court has granted an interim order interdicting evictions in Observatory. And Volkswagen has apologized for posting a racist video promoting its new Golf 8 on the company's official Instagram page. The video clip has been withdrawn, but not before it was reposted elsewhere on social media. It showed an outsized white hand pushing a black man away from a parked VW Golf before flicking him into a restaurant called Petit Colon, which translates from French as the little colonist or little settler. These and other stories at 3 or as they happen. Looking at your traffic, law enforcement officers are on the scene of a stone-throwing incident on Jakes Gerwel Drive. Officers say vehicles were pelted with stones in the vicinity of Samora Mashal. Road closures will be put in place in the area. Wesley Peterson, EWN Traffic.
Thank you so much, Wesley. We continue our conversation with Deon Meyer, chatting to us about his latest book, The Last Hunt, and the character of his Hawks detective, Benny Griesel. People obviously love him, Deon, because most of the questions I'm getting are about this character. Somebody's asking, if you had to meet Benny Griesel for lunch, non-alcoholic, of course, what would you like to ask him, and do you think you'd get along well?
Yeah, I think I would get along well with Benny, and I would just love to hear about the latest case that he's investigating. Whenever I meet up with cops, I want to get all the inside information. I want to get the lingo that they use. They have a language all of their own. So my discussion with him would be very much around the docket on his table.
Mm-hmm. Somebody else is asking whether you've got as far as imagining him as an on-screen character. As I mentioned at the start, a number of your works have been picked up with the film rights and potential TV series in mind. Have you got an actor in mind that you think would be good in the role of Benny Griesel?
I stopped doing that way back when several different actors were connected with the project. I always thought that the late Paul Eilers would be a perfect Benny Griesel because he resembles the Benny Griesel in my mind. But then you realize that in the real world, it's always going to be a tough one. The interesting thing is that there are plans to bring Benny to the screen. I'm not allowed to say too much, but what I can say is that casting is very much being looked at the moment. And one of the big problems remain that if it's going to be an international production, then with international money, then the international broadcasters usually want someone in the main role who is recognizable, who's got box office clout, that sort of thing. So it's going to be very tough. But there's so much talent, and I'm sure whoever gets the nod eventually will do great justice to the role.
That's very exciting news indeed. Of course, we've just had a look at a visual representation of your work in the series Trackers on Mnet not so long ago. And I know we had a chat on air at the time it launched. You said you were really happy with the way the series had turned out, and particularly with the high quality of the production. Let's do a catch up. Deon, having had it screened in South Africa, you've had some time now for viewer feedback. How happy are you with the way the audience received the series?
We are incredibly happy. I mean, it broke all broadcasting records in South Africa for a local production. It even did better on Mnet than Game of Thrones, which is a good bragging rights to have. And it is being aired. I'm actually preparing now for some interviews for the international media next week, because it's going to air in North America, in South America, and in Europe in June. So it's very exciting.
That's exciting news indeed. Before we leave the subject of Trackers, I mean, the quality of the cinematography was really beautiful on that series, really did proud to the landscapes of South Africa. And I wanted to take a moment to mention the fact that that's something you care very deeply about. You have a great visual eye as well as an knack for storytelling with words. You're a very keen and very good photographer, particularly when it comes to representing the Karoo. What is it, I mean, about that landscape in particular that mesmerizes you so, Deon?
I think it's because that landscape tells a story. I mean, the Karoo is one big story, you know, from prehistoric times. The fossils that are found there, the geological stories that landscape can tell, and then the people of the Karoo who are story people. I think that is why I love it so much.
Mm-hmm. Now, everybody's asking, and I've got to ask, not about The Last Hunt, but about a previous book that has taken on a whole new sort of meaning in the times of COVID-19, and that's the book Koors or Fever. Tanya's just messaged asking, are you concerned that sometimes your books cut too close to the truth? I've been told many times that I need to read Fever during this lockdown. Fever, for those who haven't read it, was a book set in a post-apocalyptic South Africa and world where a virulent virus had decimated the population. How do you feel thinking on that storyline in the times of COVID-19, Deon?
Well, it's been surreal. The funny thing is that the virus that I used in the book is a coronavirus. And when I did my research, I worked with Professor Wolfgang Preiser from Stellenbosch University. And he and a friend of his in the UK came up with a coronavirus that came from bats and then started infecting people. So it was pretty scary, you know, when the news broke about the pandemic in China. I thought, well, it's like the swine fever and the bird fever, it's going to stay there. And then when it broke out and became international, that was the first time that I thought, wow, this is very close to the book Fever. And it's been surreal. It's been crazy. Luckily, the COVID-19 virus is not nearly as virulent and as deadly as the one in my book. But still, it's been weird.
Well, a lot of people are using words like Deon having predicted the coronavirus. I don't think that's strictly accurate, but it is quite eerie. Our family devoured Fever on a holiday about 2 years ago, one after the other. The book's spine is broken, having been passed around feverishly between four of us. And, you know, it seemed like something that was science fiction and completely in the realm of imagination at the time, and look where we are today having this conversation. So maybe you need to give us a warning about what the next book's going to be about, Deon.
Right, well, maybe not. No, you know, the funny thing is when I did my research for Fever, I came upon so many scientific papers and very smart people warning that the pandemic was coming. It was definitely coming. It was a sure thing. And not seeing any reaction internationally from countries preparing for this. And if you look at how it caught us unawares, then it's crazy that we did not heed these warnings from very smart, very educated people who did the research.
Deon, a lot of people are asking about translations and audio versions of your book. So let's spend a little bit of time on that. Firstly, Val sending a WhatsApp simply saying, Deon Meyer, you rock. When I can't get your English books at the library, I read the Afrikaans versions. The Afrikaans versions come first, don't they? Diana and several others asking which language you write in, and secondly, whether you're involved in the translation yourself.
Right. I do write in Afrikaans. It is my mother tongue. It's the language in which I dream and think. And it's always difficult to write in a second language. You know, I mean, writing for me is hard enough just in Afrikaans to find the right words, to find the right rhythm, to find the texture of the language that you need, especially genre fiction, it's just so much easier to write in Afrikaans, and I'm very happy that I have a loyal Afrikaans readership. And then I have a wonderful translator, Laura Seeger. She lives in Graaff-Reinet. I think she's listening. Hi, Laura. You are absolutely fantastic. It's such a pleasure to work with Laura. I usually finish the book. I send it to Laura, and then as she finishes every 10 chapters, she sends to me, and then we have long discussions about them. But I must say, for the last 3, 4, 5 books, it's been very easy. I would usually just have a few words of dialogue changing because I hear it a little differently in my head. I do go through the English translation very carefully so that by the time it goes to print, I think it is an exact mirror image of the Afrikaans. The Chinese translation is a bit more difficult. It takes me longer to work through.
Slightly longer.
Yeah. But no, that's so. The Afrikaans and the English are used as the vehicle for translation into so many other languages. So I'm happy that when that is done and it's done very well, then it should be fine. I have very good translators and editors all over the world. They can all read either Afrikaans or English, and they do a great job.
Now, on the audio issue, a lovely email in before we came to air today from our listener, Kevin, who says the following. Let me read it to you verbatim. Deon is one of the world's greatest authors, and I think his book Fever is eerily relevant today. My wife and I are both avid readers, but because I am blind, we choose to listen to the audible version of his books. I particularly enjoy the graphic descriptions of Cape Town, as this provides me with details of my surroundings and helps me to create a mental picture of Cape Town. The narration of these books is excellent. The narrator Saul Reichling able to expertly and precisely deliver a diverse range of South African accents. Do you always work with the same narrator on all of the audio versions of your books?
We try to. Saul does the UK version. Saul is a South African. He's a very good actor as well. He's a good friend of mine, and he is truly brilliant. In America, I have 2 narrators, the one for the non-Benny books and one for the Benny books. And I also work closely with him. We spend a lot of time on WhatsApp so that he can make sure he gets the pronunciation of Afrikaans place names and the Afrikaans words that we do allow through. And then there are some of the books are also in Afrikaans in audio, but the Afrikaans market is small, and it's very hard for the publisher to keep on producing them if the uptake is not that high.
Mm-hmm. And wondering whether this latest book, The Last Hunt, is going to become available as an audiobook. Has that already happened, or is it in the pipeline?
No, it has already happened in the UK. I think Saul has done his bit. I think it's about to be released in the USA and Canada very shortly.
Good news, and not too long to wait. A comment from one of our listeners that they think Arnold Vosloo could be a very good Benny Grissel. He's well known here and overseas, and could also speak Afrikaans fluently if needed. Ever had any conversations with Arnold Vosloo about the part? I suppose you can't tell us if you have.
No, I absolutely agree. Arnold is really on top of my list. But again, it's not going to be my final choice. I'm not going to be executive producer on the Benny Grissel series. I spoke to Arnold. We had him over here for the filming of Griekwa Stad, the movie that was, it's on box office at the moment. We can't release it into theaters because of the lockdown. Arnold is a fantastic guy. He's very keen to do more South African and Afrikaans work, and I think he would be a great Benny Grissel. You'll just have to learn to drink more.
Okay, let's talk about the writing process, because there are quite a few, by the looks of things, aspiring writers or busy with their first novel listening today. And Andrea is asking, where do you get your stories from? Where do they come from? Is it just an idea that grows, or is the story fully plotted out in your head? Where does this inspiration come from?
Well, inspiration comes from everywhere. I think if you are going to write, you need to have a huge curiosity about the world around you. You've got to read, you've got to listen, you've got to watch, and then just let stuff come to you. You know, there are 10 story ideas every day. I think the biggest challenge is to choose the right one. And story ideas are strange things. You know, you get one thing and you think, well, that might work, but then 2 weeks later you find something else that fits perfectly, and suddenly it's like a little chemical reaction and there's a spark. and then you find it's like building a puzzle. You have all these little pieces that you start putting together, and suddenly a picture starts emerging that excites you. And it's got to excite you, because writing a novel is a marathon. You know, it's months and months of sitting in a dark little room just writing. So if it doesn't excite you, then it's probably not the right story idea. It's a long, hard slog. But story ideas come from everywhere, and you got to go out, you got to live, you got to listen, you got to read, you got to watch, and see where they come from.
Deon, when you talk to filmmakers, they always talk about how much material ends up on the cutting room floor. What's it like for a writer? I mean, do you work through countless drafts, discarding entire plot lines, characters, pieces of writing, starting all over again? What sort of a process do you go through?
My process allows me not to throw away that much. I throw about 10% of everything that I write away, because what I do is when I start writing in the morning, I review what I did the day before. And if I find then that this is the wrong track, then I just stop there and rewrite. So I've never really been in a position, I was once in a position where I threw away the first 60 pages of a novel. But again, that wasn't wasted, because a couple of years later, I found another idea that fitted perfectly, and that became Blood Safari, or Sigbaar in Afrikaans.
Okay.
I don't think anything is ever wasted, but obviously writing is rewriting. I just do my rewriting every morning for about an hour, so that eventually I don't have to do a full book rewrite, but I do go through the book once the first draft is done, and just polish it and keep on doing better and better. One is never happy, you know, even when the book goes off to my publisher, I still wish I could rewrite it 10 times. But you gotta let go sooner or later.
What's it like letting go to the world of the movies and TV? I mean, you've had the experience several times now, because you have to at some point say, right, this is my baby and I'm giving it to you to go and rebirth in a new form. Is it difficult, or is it a relief in a way to say, this is the point where I step back?
Early in my career, when I had to just completely let go and give total control to whoever was making the series or the movie, it was harder, because some of the productions I wasn't very happy with. I'm not going to mention which. So for the last few years, I've tried to at least keep some form of control, at least final okay of the scripts, or a say in the casting and that sort of thing. And since that time, I've been very proud. I think Trackers was the first real product of that environment. I was very involved in the script writing. I sat in on all the creative meetings. So, you know, I'm very proud of Trackers, and I would love to keep it that way.
Okay. Danica, one of the aspiring writers who's struggling with the issue of momentum. She says, I'm busy writing my first novel. It's really hard keeping the ideas flowing. Any advice?
You just got to keep chipping away. You know, writing is like any other job. You're going to have good days and bad days. And in the bad days, if you get 30 words written, that's fine. But that's 30 words that didn't exist yesterday. You just got to keep chipping away. Writing is, as I said earlier, writing is about momentum, and it's about routine. You have to build on what you did yesterday. You have to get your head in there. Writing is like anything you do in life. The more you do it, the easier, well, not easy, it never gets easier, but the more you learn, and the more you learn, the more you can solve the creative problems that you are confronted with. The other best advice I can give is to read all the best authors in the world, because you absorb so much in terms of creative problem solving when you read great books, that I find that often that would help me in solving a problem that I've been facing. The other thing is either shower or sleep. There's nothing like stepping back, having a good sleep, or under the shower, the flow of the water seems to get the ideas flowing too. And there are no distractions when you're sleeping or when you're showering. You can't look at your phone, you can't watch a TV screen or computer screen. So those are all little tricks to get the juices flowing again.
Thanks so much, and good luck, Danica. I can't wait to read it when it's done. Deon, speaking of the reading of other authors, Andrew's commented on the webinar that he believes Benny Griessel and Harry Holler from the Ionesbo novels have quite a lot in common, and he'd like your comments on that. I'm interested to know which other crime writers in particular you like to read. Would Ionesbo be one of them?
Yeah, I love your books. He's also a friend of mine. The international crime writing circuit is quite a small one, so we all know one another. I started reading his books long after Benny was created. The idea of the alcoholic cop is not a new one. I think both you, Esmer, and I owe a certain debt to a lot of authors who've gone before, especially the American hard-boiled crime fiction of the 1960s and 70s. Yeah, there will be similarities, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the Scandinavian crime writers, a couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to interview Jon Leerhorst, a Norwegian writer, and he commented in one of our panels on how strange it was to be sitting in South Africa talking to me, a country whose daily murder rate eclipses the annual murder rate in the country he comes from. Let's talk a little bit about the particular South African context and our violent society and how that influences the way you write crime. Obviously, it means there's lots of fodder in terms of caseloads for you to talk about, but I'm particularly interested in how you feel about portraying violence in your novels, given how much violence we all live with in the daily news headlines. Does that influence the way you write a lot?
Yes, I think it does. One of the interesting subjects I often talk to about with my Scandinavian colleagues is how much more bloody and violent their crime fiction is. South African crime fiction is generally less violent. I think it's because of the environment that we live in. I have no real need to create these extremely violent murders scenes in my book. You know, the funny thing about real world crime in any country, and especially in South Africa, 85% of crime anywhere on the globe is alcohol and drug related, is often domestic in nature. The perpetrator and the victim knew one another. And that does not make for good crime fiction. That is just heartbreakingly sad. And so the crime rate as such doesn't aid me as a crime author at all. It's the dynamics of the country, the very interesting dynamics in South Africa that makes us different, and that I think makes our crime fiction different. The fact that we are such a diverse nation, that our police force works in this diversity, not only in terms of your race or your ethnicity, but also in terms of the haves and the have-nots. That, for me, is much more useful than the crime in South Africa.
Interesting. Marion is asking, given what you've said about the characters living in your head and sometimes needing to step away and be in the shower to seek inspiration, etc., if they're with you in your head all the time, how do you switch off and relax, is the question.
I don't think one can ever, especially when you write, you know, after I've finished a book, then it's quite easy to step back and have a holiday from all your characters for a month or so. But the moment that you start a book, and that is, it's both a blessing and a curse, because the moment you start, they're there and they don't leave your head until you finish. Marianne, my wife, will tell you that I can sometimes be extremely absent when we go back in the day before the lockdown, when we went on bike rides. She would talk to me and I would suddenly realize I was a mile away with my mind in the book. So it's hard to switch off, and that is why I try to take a break of at least a month or two or even 3 between books, just to get my head clear again, because it's a big thing. You know, your subconscious, I don't think, can always distinguish between reality and this fictional world, because you spend so much time in the fictional world. When I write, I can see and hear and taste what my characters are experiencing, and it becomes very real to me. So I think it's essential for one's own sanity to just get away from it from time to time.
Okay. A question all the way from Ireland. Hello, Amanda, listening to us in Ireland. She wants to know, Deon, whether you had any kind of formal creative writing education or whether it's all entirely self-taught. And the second part of her question is, do you have the entire plot line laid out before you start, or do the twists and turns take you by surprise as you write?
Let me try and answer the first one. Top of the morning to you. That's my best Irish accent I can put on at the moment. I didn't study writing, creative writing initially. I did a BA with English and history, but then I became a journalist. And a journalist working at a daily newspaper, I wrote every day, and I think that was incredibly valuable. I also then worked as an advertising copywriter, learned so much there because it's a different way of writing. So in that sense, I did have formal writing training, but not for fiction. Fiction was a huge jump for me. And fiction has its own language, its own texture, its own feeling. And I had to explore that. I had to learn that. My first book in Afrikaans was never translated into English because for me it was one huge learning curve. And then I did an MA in creative writing at Stellenbosch under the brilliant, wonderful Marlene van Niekerk, but only after I had published 5 or 6 books. And I also thought that was a really valuable thing to do because that taught me different mechanics of writing, thinking about my work differently, which was also very valuable. And now you have to remind me what the second part of the question is.
Fair enough. The second part was whether you have the plot fully formatted in your head as you start or whether some of it surprises you along the way.
I never have the plot fully formed in my head. I usually have an idea. There's this wonderful saying by a famous American author that writing is like driving a car at night. You can only see what is illuminated by the headlights, which is the next 2 or 3 chapters. But you do know where you're going. You know where you're traveling through the night. You have a sort of an end point that you're approaching, but that might change. I love the fact that things happen on the page, that you go in a certain direction and then either through research, because research, the great thing about research is that it multiplies your creative choices. So either through research or something that the characters would do, give you a new destination to write towards. To me, that is the exciting part of writing.
Deon, speaking of the research, a couple of the CapeTalk listeners are asking about your research into police procedure in particular. You've mentioned the fact that you connected with a number of cops and obviously the terms they use, the manner of their speech, etc. How much access do you get? I mean, in this latest book, The Last Hunt, there's a post-mortem scene. There's a lot of work on forensics around blood spatter and crime scenes, etc. How close have you got to the actual thing? Have you been allowed to ride shotgun with cops on that kind of work?
I have. I've been extremely fortunate, and I'm so grateful for so many policemen and women who have allowed me into their lives, into their offices, into their investigations. I'm thinking of Colonel Elmarie Mayberg, a police forensic psychologist who she reads every manuscript when I finish it just to check that I didn't make too much of a fool of myself. Just now with the new novel that I'm busy with now, I spent some time at the Stellenbosch, both the police station and the detectives. I still speak to them once or twice a week to make sure that I get all the systems and the things right. It gives a certain credibility. The thing that I'm very aware of at the moment is that you can never write a novel that is absolutely true to life in terms of a detective's workload, because their lives are very different to how you portray them. They spend hours waiting outside courtrooms. They have to go testify. A lot of stuff that would be very boring to put into a book. So fact and fiction should merge together into something that has verisimility. It's got to have the texture and the feeling of truth. It's got to be believable, but it can never be quite the real thing.
Speaking of overseas audiences, we've heard from Ireland. We've heard from somebody greeting us in Amsterdam. Here's a message from Sweden. Henning Melba, thank you for your message, saying, thank you for bringing South Africa's Mensa at least an hour along to Sweden. Cannot wait for the next book published in Afrikaans. They are unique in detail, although it's only my 3rd language. How long is it going to be, Deon? As you've said, you're pretty close to the end of scripting the latest novel starring Benny Griesel. How long does it take? Well, 2 questions. How long does it take to get to that point? Do you work on a book for a year, for several months? And then from here, how long until it's actually on a shelf in a bookstore?
In Afrikaans, I usually work about a year to 18 months on a book. And the more I need to travel, the more TV series we make, the less time I have for writing. So it's probably going to end up being 2 years for every new book, for which I do apologize, but there really isn't time for more. And then once I'm finished, it's probably 3-4 months before it goes out in Afrikaans. Laura, my translator, starts translating the moment that we're happy with the Afrikaans. That usually comes a year after the Afrikaans, the English version. Henan, thank you for your message from Sweden. The Last Hunt will be out in Sweden quite soon, with a wonderful Swedish title, which reflects the original Afrikaans in a very interesting way. But the next Afrikaans book, it's called Donker Drif, and it should be out in Afrikaans, let's hope, late October.
That's fantastic news. Donker Drif out in late October. I think we give the final question to Myrna while we're talking about the title of novels. She'd like to know when and how you actually decide on the name of the book. Do you do it right at the end or do you do it at the start?
Usually I do it at the start. You have to save the document that you're creating as something on your computer, and then usually I think, well, it's going to be more or less about this, and that is often the title. For Donker Drif, it took me half the book. I had 3 different potential titles. I tested them with my editor and my agent, and Donker Drif was the one that won the day.
Now, at this point, we're going to say goodbye to the audience listening on CapeTalk, but just to those who are listening in on the Zoom conference, Deon and I are going to stay online with you for another 15 minutes or so to wrap up the last few questions we haven't got to yet. If you'd like to keep on asking questions, please do so that in the webinar chat panel, and we'll continue just after this. To those listening on air, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation, and don't forget to look for The Last Hunt in your exclusive books near you, and if you're lucky enough, on the Uber Eats delivery system. It can be with you in just an hour from now.
On capetalk.co.za.
On the app.
On DSTV channel 885.
And across the city on 567 AM.
Join the conversation. You're with Cape Talk.
You're with Cape Talk.
This is Eyewitness News.
Eskom still far from financially sustainable, and court rules city may not evict OB squatters. Good afternoon, I'm Wesley Peterson. Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter says while the company's restructuring process is underway, they are still working on its independent financial sustainability. The power utility has been dependent on government guarantees for years to keep up with its operations.
Okay. Sorry for the small interruption there for technical purposes, but hello again to everybody on the webinar. And as we say goodbye to the Cape Talk audience, Deon and I are very happy to carry on for a couple more minutes to tackle the questions we haven't got to. Deon, is there anything I haven't discussed with you that you'd like to share with the webinar audience?
Well, just to say that I'm delighted to be here. This is a first for me. I've never done a Zoom webinar. And I'm also, I saw in the news that governmental Zoom webinar had some nasty video material posted on it. Thank you to everybody who didn't do that.
Well, thank you to the hosts Exclusive Books for setting the privacy settings correctly. Is quite important as well.
I also neglected to thank Exclusive Books. I think what they're doing with Uber Eats and with these webinars, it's fantastic. We all need to work together to help the book industry, especially shops that are having a really tough time. So thanks to Exclusive Books, and please, readers everywhere, support your local bookstore.
Thank goodness the bookstores are open again after those terrible few weeks where we couldn't purchase a book, which felt like a bigger deprivation than not being able to buy booze and cigarettes for some of us, although only just. Right, back to the webinar questions, and just to the audience again, you're very welcome to use the chat panel to ask a question. And Andrea, thanks. Andrea enjoyed being able to see the inside of the radio studio as well as the background to your office. Deon, do you always write in the same place, or do you sometimes go and sort of take yourself completely outside of that comfort zone to try and find some inspiration in another setting?
No, I can't write in any other environment.
Really?
I'm easily distracted. that's the big problem. I write on the computer that's behind me at the moment. I sit with my face towards the wall. I close all the blinds. I switch off the lights. I only have enough light when I'm writing to read the dictionary or the resource that I'm looking at in terms of research. I try to just minimize all distractions. I find it very tough. I had to write. I remember finishing, I think it was 7 days in a hotel room in San Francisco. I wrote The Last Hunt, a large part of it in an apartment in Bordeaux. But again, those were closed environments with very little distractions. I find it very hard to write in coffee shops and in airports and on aeroplanes and that sort of thing.
I'm glad you mentioned Bordeaux because Suzanne has asked about that. I mean, you write so beautifully about that setting and you make your characters' love for what that place has offered him in terms of a second start in life. So beautifully expressed in this book. Suzanne wants to know whether you got to spend a long time in Bordeaux and what you thought of it yourself.
Well, I've discovered Bordeaux because I've never been there I think 12 years ago. And I just felt I was invited to a book festival just outside of Bordeaux, and I spent a few days in the city, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. I came back and I asked Marianne to go with me next time, hoping that she would fall in love with Bordeaux as well, and I'm happy to say that was the case. So we've been spending our South African winters in Bordeaux for the last 8 or 9 years, always in the same apartment. And we absolutely adore the city and the whole of the Dordogne and the Aquitaine areas. We keep 2 bicycles there, so we do a lot of riding. And I've read a lot about the history. So it was a real pleasure. For me, it was another passion project to write about Bordeaux, to share my love and my fascination for the place. And we keep going back. As a matter of fact, we've been there right now if it hadn't been for lockdown.
Sorry, well, you'll have to settle for a Zoom conference with us instead. But no, I mean, your love for the place shines in.
I could have done a Zoom conference from Bordeaux too.
Well, let's make a date to do that for the next one, Deon. Okay, I'll hold you to that. A lovely question in from Brandon in Takai, who is wondering whether you read nonfiction and see the value in nonfiction books as opposed to fiction, seeing as you are primarily a writer of fiction. And why don't you write nonfiction, he asks.
I have written a book of nonfiction. I wrote a book on adventure motorcycling some years ago. It's still available only as an e-book. It's called, what's the English title? I'll remember in a second. When I'm writing, I find it very hard to read fiction. So when I'm busy with the book, I read nonfiction mostly. I love reading all sorts of, I read about science and history and economics. I love reading nonfiction.
So Sasha is asking what you would read for leisure. So you've already partly answered. If you're busy writing a book, you would read nonfiction. But when you aren't busy with a book at the moment, what would be your comfort book to pick up and take you away from the world?
I see someone asked earlier, do I read Lee Child? He's one of my comfort books. I love Lee Child. I love Jack Reacher. I'm also happy to call Lee a friend. We've met on several occasions, last time in Lyon in France last year. He's a great guy, although he's now retired. He's got someone else writing with him, doing, I think, most of the heavy lifting. But Lee is a great guy, and his books are definitely part of my comfort reading. I love Ian Rankin and Michael Connolly. There are so many others. I have a little page on my website where I mention all the authors that I love. Please, if I don't remember them all now, go have a look there.
Michael Connolly is one of my favorites as well. And I actually met him in the lift here at CapeTalk when he was in the building for an interview about a year ago. And I couldn't get a word out. I was so excited to meet him. So another interview to happen at another time when I can get my wits about me. Tanya's, yeah?
No, I have to tell you a quick story about Michael Connolly. My first US book tour, Michael and I had the same publisher, and they asked Michael to take me on this tour so that at least a few people would turn up at my book events. And we apparently, when we had the same French publisher too, and my French publisher said, but we look like brothers, Michael and I. We very much look alike, especially I think when we were younger, we both had round, rimless glasses and this little goatee beard. So in Arizona, we had a big event, and I went outside to have a smoke, and this guy came up with a big stack of Michael's books, and he said, when he saw me, he said, "Oh, Michael Conley, I'm so happy to see you." And I said, "Well, I'm not Michael Conley." This guy said, "Well, what's with the accent? Of course you're Michael Conley." And it really took some time to convince this guy that I wasn't Michael Conley.
How funny. So somebody's remembered the name of your book for you. Thank you very much. Is it Gordon saying Deon's adventure bike book is called Dirt Busters in English, for those who want to find it. Thank you so much. We've got a couple minutes left. If you're still wanting to ask a question, you're very welcome to pop one in. We do need to wrap by about 3:20 or so before the technology kicks us off the platform, just to let you know that there's lots of praise coming your way on the chat box. Deon, somebody saying you are a legend, your books are amazing, and you have an amazing ability to capture my mind when I'm reading them. A lot of people are also still not convinced that you did not predict COVID-19 in fever. So maybe let's go back there and talk about where that novel came from. What was the spark of inspiration that started that story?
It's one of those long stories. I was on a book tour in the USA, and in New York, I went to a bookshop and I love reading science fiction too, and I saw a compendium of post-apocalyptic short stories. And I bought this for the plane, and on the way back, I started reading these stories. And there was one of these post-apocalyptic short stories that when I started reading it, I thought, wow, this is going to be good. And I sort of envisaged in which direction the author was going. And when she didn't go in that direction, I thought, no, that was the storyline that would have been captivating. And maybe I should keep it in the back of my mind one day to explore that possibility. And the idea just stuck with me, and the more I read about pandemics, about global warming, about all the things that are waiting for us in future, the more I realized what the potential for such a novel would be. And I kept thinking about it, and at one stage I wrote a couple of chapters, and I spoke to my agent about it, and I said, well, this is the next book I want to write. And she said, no, not now. This was, I think, 5 years ago. She said, we were in the Netherlands and a few other markets. We were on the brink of, a sort of a breakthrough with my Benny Friesel novels. So she said, hang on, later, I'll tell you when the time is right. And then I think 3 years later, she said, now you can unleash that story. And by that time, I had accumulated so much research material, and I had so much time to think that it was a book that almost wrote itself. It was an incredibly pleasurable writing experience for me. I think also because it was so different to anything that I've done before, I could really let my imagination run free, try new things, experiment with stuff. So I had a lot of fun writing it, never thinking that this would become a sort of a reality sometime in the future.
A few people are asking about word counts per day. I mean, you've already made the comment to the struggling writer earlier that a day's writing is never wasted, and even if you only got 30 or 300 words out of it, they're 30 or 300 new words. Do you set yourself a target per day? Do you not leave your desk until you've written a certain number?
I try to. I use an app called Scrivener, and one of the great things about Scrivener is you can tell it when more or less you want to be finished with a book, and how many days a week you want to write. And then it will tell you how many words you should stick to every day. But obviously, with book tours and appearances and lots of other things, you know that you're not going to be able to reach that target every day. So sometimes 2 weeks would go by with no writing, and then when you get back, that target is higher, but then you try and stick to it. I've learned over the years that certain days you're not going to reach that target, no matter how hard you try. There's just nothing happening. It's just a bad day at work. But you also know that some days you're going to write 3 or 4 times that target. So for me, it's more of a ballpark figure of try and stay within that word count more or less. But I've learned over the years that eventually you'll sort of make that deadline. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Sometimes be gentle, but sometimes also be strict and say, now you sit down and you get some writing done, because we're all a bit lazy, and writing is hard work. I don't I don't think people always believe that, but it can be very exacting and challenging at times.
We know there's a ball and chain under that desk waiting to reattach to your leg at the end of this, Deon. Great question from Cleo. I love this. She says, I've heard you need to have something of a criminal mind to write crime. Is there any truth in that? Confess your sins, Deon.
I think I would make a horrible criminal. I just don't have the guts. No, I think I started reading crime fiction at the age of 13 or 14. I discovered Ed McBain's wonderful books. And if people have not read Ed McBain, that is my first recommendation. I think he's the best crime writer ever. He's just fantastic. His 87th pressing series, try and read them in the order they were written. So I fell in love with crime fiction as a teenager. Then as a journalist, I did some crime reporting, which exposed me to the South African police and detectives and investigation. And it just all came from amalgamating those interests together, and it became a passion eventually.
Quite a number of people are asking whether there's going to be a sequel to Fever, Deon. Barry saying the end seemed to open the door for one. Is it something you've thought about?
It is something that a lot of people ask me about, and it is something that I think about. But again, I have to find the right story. For me, a sequel that is not as good as the original is always a huge disappointment. I can't afford to disappoint my readers, so I really have to come up with something that's really clever and good enough before I would attempt that.
What about a movie? Several people asking whether Fever is one of the books that have been picked up for film rights. I would imagine if anybody is sitting with those film rights right now, they're holding a hot potato wondering whether it could be made into a movie given the current climate. Is it a possibility?
Well, the TV rights were optioned by a UK company, and they have had a first episode written, and they are looking for backing internationally. But the latest feedback is that under the current circumstances, nobody is too keen to make a pandemic TV series. So maybe we'll have to give it a year or two.
Although, as somebody points out on the chat, there's a perfect opportunity to film drone footage of deserted cities right now if you need some stock footage to use. Very, very good point.
A lot of people are
Cherry asking whether you ever suffer from writer's block. She says, I just cannot seem to knuckle down to mine. Is it something you suffer from at all?
No, because I have children at university and their university is paid. That's a wonderful cure for writer's block. I've never really battled with that. Obviously, sometimes you have a creative problem. I think writing is about solving creative problems. You've got to get to the next point in the story, and sometimes it's really tough. The best thing if you get stuck is to just sit back a little, sleep on it, take that shower, but not in Cape Town because they have a water shortage. Step back a little bit and let it bubble in the back of your mind. The subconscious is a wonderful thing. It provides solutions, sometimes not immediately. I've battled with a problem for a week or more. And then finally it comes and then you realize it was back there again. You just had to give it the opportunity to get out. Most authors I know don't suffer from writer's block. Laziness, yes, but writer's block, no.
I'm interested to know how you feel now about your earlier works. Do you ever go back and reread the very first novels and beat yourself up for should have done that differently, could have done that better, or is it a dish best left on the sideboard?
Absolutely. No, I hate doing that because whenever you go and look back at what you did before, you realize how bad it is and how much better you could have done. It's a funny thing, when you start a book, you have a certain image in your mind, you have a certain vision of what it could be. And I think Fever was the only one where I felt I got fairly close, although The Last Hunt, I think, was also closer than anything I've done before. But for me, for my own judgment, I never quite get to what I wanted to do. But that's writing. Writing is a lifelong learning experience. You're always going to keep learning. You've got to challenge yourself. You've got to try new things. You've got to be willing to fail so that you can learn. Because you're never going to stop learning. And only J.M. Coetzee can be perfect. The rest of us have to just make peace with the fact that we won't be.
Which other South African writers do you think get pretty close to perfect?
Well, Marlene van Niekerk, I think, is perfect too. I think she's Nobel Prize stature. I think she's just fantastic. Ivan Vladislavic is fantastic. I mean, there are so many. Karen Brainert, I think, is a fantastic crime author in South Africa. Mike good grief.
Nickel.
Mike Nickel is
Yep.
brilliant at what he does. There are so many world-class authors in South Africa. For me, that's a wonderful thing. I think we are a nation of storytellers, and we have a lot to offer the world in terms of literature.
Another question in from Henning in Sweden, saying Prooi, or The Last Hunt as it is in English, not only about politics, it's really about morals and ethics in so many aspects and about the integrity of the characters, perhaps more so than before. Will these dimensions be as strong a focus in your forthcoming plots, stressing the social political dimensions of crime novels like so many of the authors in Sweden do? Interesting question, Henning.
Yeah, you know, I just want to tell a story, and when readers find more in the story than I wanted to put in, that is great. For me, the story needs to work as crime fiction, as something that is entertaining and absorbing, keeps the reader from turning the pages. Anything else is a bonus. The book that I'm writing now is a direct sequel to The Last Hunt. At the end of The Last Hunt, Benny and Vaughan are in very deep trouble, and this takes them one step further. And that's all I really want to do, is to continue that story and provide a book that will give people pleasure in reading. As I say, anything else, if people find more in the book, then I'm happy with that.
I think we can squeeze in two last questions from the Q&A. Deborah is asking how much time you spend on research relative to the actual writing of the book.
I would say as much research as writing. I usually start 3 months before I write. I start doing research, and then the research process does not end until the last word is written. Sometimes I will spend half the day writing, half the day researching. The book that I'm writing now, as I said, I'm almost 50,000 pages done, and I still keep calling my police contacts just to check certain things and make sure of other things. It's a never-ending process. Readers are very quick to point out if you make a fool of yourself and make a stupid mistake, and it hurts, you know. So I try and save myself that pain of being called stupid.
One last question from Patrick, who says he absolutely loves your books and he thinks you're a South African treasure. He says the following: Benny is supported by such a strong cast of characters, Mbali, Sandra, Vaughan, etc. How much time do you spend on their characters and challenges as supports to Benny? And any thoughts on developing them into main characters in the future?
Well, let me answer the last bit first. If I find a story that is perfect for Mbali as a protagonist, then absolutely she will get her book. But as I said before, story to me comes first, and the characters must serve the story primarily. I spend as much time on those characters as I do on the protagonist, because for me it's important to understand the psychological makeup of all the more important characters in the book. So that when they do react, when they act and react, it must be in the context of their personality and their psychological makeup. So I try and spend as much time as humanly possible to get them right, and get them human.
I'm not going to ask you to tell us what they'll be doing in the next novel. I'll simply remind everybody that Donker Drif should be out, hopefully, fingers crossed, by late October. In the meantime, if you haven't already done so, please get your hands on a copy of The Last Hunt, or Prooi as it was in Afrikaans, both available on the Exclusive Books website and at all Exclusive Books branches and any decent bookstore for that matter. And just a reminder that if you are lucky enough to live in the vicinity of one of the Exclusive Books branches that is partnered with Uber Eats, if you live within a 5-kilometer radius of those stores, you can order a copy right now. It's 3:20. It'll be at your front door by 4:30 this afternoon. So if you can't wait to read it, that's your best option to pick up a copy within the hour. Deon, it's always a delight to chat to you, but thank you so much for being so generous with your time this afternoon and giving us so much of it. And we better send you back to the desk to finish the day's writing. Thanks. Great to have you with us today.
Pippa, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for directing us this so beautifully. Thanks to everybody who signed on and watched, and thank you for the questions. It's been a real joy and an honor. Thank you so much.
My thanks as well to the audience members on the webinar. Great chatting to you this afternoon, and thanks for being such engaged panelists. It really makes our jobs much easier. Lovely to chat to you all. And take care, everybody. Stay well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.